Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Alex Thomas Show. I am ecstatic this evening because I have Ypsilanti mayoral candidate, Ms. Ann Brown.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Oh, ecstatic that you're here and welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, just before the show, about 6 months ago, I think, it was right before July 4th was the first time that I met Ms. Brown, and she was all that I'd heard about from many of the people that I respect here around Riverside that have had a lot of influence on CBO and just more progressive politics around the city of Ypsilanti. But we didn't get a chance to talk that much. And just about 15 minutes ago when she came here, we were just, woo. So that's why we're about 5 minutes over.
Right.
But without any further ado, I'm going to let Ann give you a bit of her just personal bio, and then we're gonna go to about 7:45, and then we're gonna talk about just the really important issues in this campaign, and if we have enough time, the state and national issues too. But Ms. Brown, so were you born in Ypsilanti?
No, actually I'm not. I'm actually from a small town west of Ypsilanti, but I came to Ypsilanti 40 years ago. Came here as a student, and met my husband, Easter. Met my husband on campus, and we decided to stay actually because of Reverend Gartha Robeson. He married us, and one of the questions he said was, would you consider making Ypsilanti a home? And we both looked and said, well, yeah, we would. I mean, because we've been here for a number of years, had both launched our professional careers here, and said to ourselves, it's a great community to start building a life. And we had great support here. A number of friends had stayed in the community that I'd come here with.
Where'd you study at Eastern?
I started off in nursing.
Okay.
And that really wasn't my thing. I mean, I loved that from the time I was a kid. I had wanted to be like a registered nurse because I like caring for people. But chemistry just was not my thing.
Okay.
And so after maybe 3 tries at that, actually he was a chemistry tutor, and he said, maybe you need to consider something else. But I ended up in health anyway, and decided that public service was really the route I wanted to go, and actually, ended up later on getting a degree in public administration. But I have always had a heart's desire to care for people, and just followed that. Followed that throughout my professional and personal life, just to make sure that people were taken care of, in better shape.
Okay.
Because your contact with people needs to leave them better than you found them.
After you graduated, did you do a few different things professionally, or did you just dive right into one career for a long time?
Even through college, I ended up working full-time job. Maybe at one point I think I was working full-time and part-time job. But no, actually I started off at U of M, like most people do. And then from there I was recruited to come to what was then Park Davis, which later became Pfizer Pharmaceutical. But went to Park Davis and worked in the research clinic for a number of years. And from there, actually, I was investigating a few things. I mean, I was content there, but my husband actually had attended a conference in Detroit around infant mortality. And I want to say, it wasn't like My Brother's Keeper, but there was a program that was targeting African-American males that he attended, and found out that, that Detroit actually had a high infant mortality rate. And when we looked at it, I mean, the whole nation in terms of African-American Black babies was 3-to-1 to our counterparts. So, and what infant mortality is like a child dies in the first year of life.
Yeah.
And so for us, 3 African-American babies died to every 1 Caucasian baby. And we were thinking of having children at that time. And I said to him when he brought that information home, I said, you know what? Before we have children, we need to figure out what's going on with, this infant mortality, how this happens, what's the root cause.
Is this early 90s or?
It was early 90s. And I actually went down, he had picked up a flyer at this meeting for a conference at Wayne State. And so I took off that day and went to the conference, and the information was just overwhelming. And I was just compelled. I walked up to the executive director, and at that time it was the Detroit Wayne County Infant Health Promotion Coalition. And I walked up to the woman who was executive director, and I said, I've got to get involved. I've got to help. I mean, I'm a sound mind, a sound body, and whatever I can do to help African-American women, Black women, and babies, I need to be doing it. And so she said, well, call me. This was like on a Saturday. She said, call me Monday morning. She gave me her card, and she said, we'll talk. And so that Monday, I couldn't wait. I went to Park Davis, and as soon as I got off work, I called her. She said, let's set up an interview. I went down and met with her and talked to her about what I, heard at this conference. And I ended up volunteering.
Okay.
At this agency. And within a month's time, they were like, you should come and work here.
Okay.
And so, because I mean, whatever I do, I have to be honest with you, Alex, I just give it my all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went in, tried to learn as much as I could, and they put me in developing a manual on how to reduce infant mortality, because that was the whole coalition's job, was to reduce infant mortality. And I mean, there are some people now that when I look back on that time are the people that really are organizing and doing things in Detroit now, like Linda Campbell with the Poor People's Campaign, and
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Phyllis Meadows, who's with the Kresge Foundation. And so they were all young Black women that had committed themselves to reducing infant mortality. So I got in there, as I said, and learned the operations in terms of what it took to reduce infant mortality. And over the couple of years, and I was actually there for a decade or more, we ended up reducing infant mortality. But at that time, the state was putting money in, the city was putting money in those efforts.
I'm curious, was there any one key or several things?
Yeah, it's a number of things. And actually, at that time, it was getting into care late.
Mm-hmm.
As African American women, we tend to wait.
Like a prenatal care then?
Yeah, well, and it was.
Or just no regular health care, and then like a prenatal.
Well, it was, what happened, what we found out was there were systems like Hutzel and Henry Ford and others, DMC, that had clinics, but the wait time to get into the clinic sometimes was 12, 13 weeks. So you were far along in your pregnancy by that time. And so we worked to reduce the wait time down to at least 4 weeks. And that just meant working with the doctors and with the nurses to make sure that women, once they, identified as being pregnant, could get into the doctor. But see, beforehand, those wait times were so long, a person was in their second or third trimester before. So, and if you haven't seen the doctor at that time, you don't know what things have really, gone on. You don't know about your eating and exercise and those kind of things, rest. The other thing was the real key to it was low birth weight, which means that if you deliver a baby that was less than 7 pounds, you had a higher chance of that child not making it to his first birthday.
Was that definitely lack of nutrition?
Some of that, some of that was lack of nutrition and lack of early access to prenatal care. Because if you're not, and I know you probably don't, but you go into the doctor like once every month, and to get weighed, they talk about your, eating habits.
I was like, I hope you're wrong, but yeah, you're right.
You go in once a month and you get weighed and you get talked to about by the nutritionist and your OBGYN about what you're eating, what your exercise habits are, taking in the right fluids and those kind of things. So, and the other thing sometimes is age. You can be young and have early, a low birth weight baby, and then you can be at the other end. You can be actually older. So those are kind of the high risk categories, either very young or at that time I think it was over 35 was considered high risk.
I wanted to give some attention to that because it's infant mortality, and it's just
and we're back there again.
Yeah, and it's, I think, and just from what I've seen in the past, it's usually an indicator of so many other areas of
learning
inequity
disabilities
and things. Yeah. And I know, and probably familiar with that Washington Opportunity Index, which shows the health disparities in our area. So,
and it starts with prenatal care.
So, real great background on that and inspiration.
Well, I enjoyed public health, but during my time in public health, I worked my way up actually from executive secretary to executive director. And during my tenure as executive director, it was probably my first or second year as ED, that we started providing services to homeless and runaway youth from birth to age 21. And I saw, we were seeing the same kids over and over that were just cycling in and out. And the other thing was that we were providing great quality care. And that's one of our mantras was, quality, access to quality care, free care, and all these things. And I said to myself, but we're not getting the desired outcome because the health of the kids is not improving.
Right.
So what are we doing wrong that's not being able to help these kids sustain good health? Because, once they come into the clinic, you patch them up or give them what they need, and then you treat them again, have them come back in. But you would just see the same cycle over and over again. And I started studying just to find out, on my own in the evenings, to figure out, what are we not doing? Because we've got access to care. We're open 7 days a week practically. We're open from 11, like from 9 in the morning to 11 or so at night. We're available and it's free. We have quality doctors who are credentialed, accredited, who are licensed, the whole thing. We had enough staff. I mean, we had social workers. We had mentors. I mean, everything you would need in a clinic to be successful. And it dawned on me just through research, and there was a group out of New York called the Ritalin Children's Center, which is now the Harlem Children's Zone.
Oh, okay.
It was Ritalin Center for Children at that time. And I
Jeffrey
started,
Canada?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I started reading up on their work because he had just become the ED or CEO. And his theory was that
Google Harlem Renaissance, is it the
Harlem Children's Zone.
Harlem Children's Zone. Some great work by Jeffrey Canada.
So I started looking at that, and his theory was that you had to build up community, meaning outside the bricks and mortar, to sustain good health, to sustain children's health. And so I started looking around Detroit and saying, okay, we have broken windows, we have abandoned homes, we have tall grass, poor performing schools, just a number of factors that he hit on that I said, we're dealing with the same situation. And so I actually went to New York and met with them and talked about, because during that same time, I became a W.K. Kellogg Fellow around youth initiatives. And so they actually paid for me to go to New York. They paid for me to go to Oakland, California, and Chicago to work with groups.
That's kind of a biggie. W.K. Kellogg. They just don't give those away.
It was awesome.
They don't give those away.
Awesome.
The W.K. Kellogg Foundation.
No, it was an excellent opportunity. But I actually went to New York and worked with him for a while just to figure out, okay, what can we do, or what are we seeing parallel in Detroit that I can take back to make things change. And where for him, it was really that grassroots mobilization of parents and kids and grandmas and barbershops and all this stuff, people coming together to build up community. When I looked at Detroit, it was a little different because parents were connected in neighborhoods because there are some neighborhoods that were just really strong. But what we found was, when families were homeless, they were moving 3 or 4 times in a school year. The other thing we found was that kids in Detroit neighborhoods, many of them, of course, there was poverty, lack of food access, just a number of things that don't contribute to you building community. And so that's where we had to start, was kind of looking at, okay, what pillars do we need to put in to help build community? Because we have, this street may be a strong street, may have full capacity. Every house is full, there's generations in there. The next street over may have 2 or 3 houses, and then the rest are vacant. So how do we connect these neighborhoods to build community in larger census tracts, right? And what dawned on me just through that kind of community building work was the fact that it's the policy piece that's missing. Once we started building up community, getting people engaged, coming to neighborhood watch meetings, going to PTA meetings, just really engaging in each other's lives, I realized that it's not us on the ground. It's the policy piece that's missing. It's what's coming down from Lansing and DC that's impacting our lives to a great degree. And so that's when I said to my board, I said, we've got to change this paradigm. We've got to start talking about how we're going to impact policy. And not how policy, we can't sit and wait for policy to come down and then we scramble around trying to figure out, what's
we have to control this environment that we're forced to work in.
Exactly.
And I think you're giving me a good segue because I want to definitely, we have about 28 more minutes and I want to really cover Ypsi, but I think before we started this show, you gave a little background on, because I mentioned how I respected so many people that were involved in the CBO and Ready and such. And then you enlightened me in as far as your relationship to that. And that's kind of in Detroit. So, but you're flowing. If you can go from that to maybe that, is there a lot in between that and we get up to
I was
the
just
CBO?
really trying to tell you how,
we got 25 minutes.
Okay, so how I got to the policy piece.
Okay,
and that was,
that's policy.
From that piece, I realized that, we're scrambling around trying to figure out what's happening in Lansing because, anytime there are budget cuts, you're dealing with a shortage of people having access to food stamps or to heat and water. You're dealing with cuts to school funding. You're dealing with, at one point we were dealing with them shutting off or eliminating vision and hearing, which is critical for elementary children. And so, it's those kind of things that we always found ourselves going to battle for in Lansing. And it's kind of like, okay, why are we going to Lansing to do battle when we need to be telling them what we need, So I went to my board and I said, listen, we've got this all wrong, that we're a direct service provider and we've been doing great direct service, but now we need to turn this. And several pressures were coming in. There was the pressures of what they call Medicaid expansion now, and there was the piece around where health insurance companies were paying for what was called, what is it called? Capitated care. That's not capitated care, but it was where they were reducing the amount of payments to doctors that provided services to Medicaid recipients.
Okay.
So we were being squeezed in that area because we were getting less money, even though we were a federally funded health center. We were having to constantly go back to the feds for more money because we were getting less in reimbursements. And I said to my board, we've got to turn the table here. I said, one, we need to talk with the health systems to see, okay, why don't you take on the greater burden of seeing clients? Just increase your capacity to see clients, and we'll reduce our capacity because somebody's got to do this work in the gap. Yes. And we're more flexible to do that because, I mean, we're a smaller agency. I mean, we don't have to go through the bureaucracy. I just have to go to the board and say, listen, this is the next step. And so we did. We worked with DMC and Hustle and some others to take on some of the work of seeing those young people we were seeing and those other individuals that were considered uninsured or underinsured. And we started the process. Which they can Google as well. It's called the Building Movement Project, which was out of Harvard. And Linda Campbell actually introduced this work to me because Hauser Center out of Harvard came to Detroit and said, listen, Detroit used to be a powerhouse when it comes to unions and social activist work, and what has happened? And so Linda convened a group of us executive directors and said, sit and talk with these people.
Linda Campbell is
Linda Campbell is actually the project director for Building Movement Detroit.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now
okay.
She is. Yeah, she's been a part of the People's Movement that did the CBO in Detroit.
Okay.
So
great.
it all grew out of that.
Okay.
So the issue was that
she put you all together.
Yeah, she put us all together, and we decided that for me, it was going to be working with my board to get them from being a direct service provider to a policy board, so that we could actually go to Lansing, advocate for the things that were needed in the city of Detroit for our population base, and have success. And
that sounds great. I mean, you have the people that do it.
Yeah.
That are writing the policy.
Right there. And I just remember sitting at a board meeting, and my board said to me, you are very passionate about this. And I said, yeah. I said, because I've seen both sides. Mm-hmm. We've been a direct service care provider. Excellent. But the missing piece is the policy piece. Mm-hmm. Lansing doesn't hear enough from us. Mm-hmm. To be able to dictate to us what it is we need. We need to be telling them what we need based on what we see every day, the work we do every day. So we started that process, and I'll cut to the chase. What happened was I ended up going to Lansing, meeting with Alma Wheeler-Smith, who was a state senator from our area, and I didn't even know that at the time. I mean, I knew her name and stuff, but I never met her. And I sat down and talked with her about some of the things I saw in Detroit and some of the things that I saw in Ypsilanti, because I was living here commuting. Mm-hmm. And we had high asthma rates at Ypsilanti. We had high infant mortality rates. We had high HIV rates. And so I said, some of the things I see in Ypsilanti that I see in Detroit, we need to start doing a different kind of work. Mm-hmm. And she agreed and said to me, okay, why don't we start talking about infant mortality? We did some projects around infant mortality and reducing low birth weight. And then, I went my way and she went her way. But I kept thinking to myself, I need to get that policy piece down because there aren't a lot of us in policy. Mm-hmm. We end up doing a lot of other stuff, but we don't do the policy piece. And I said, I need to understand that further if I'm really going to help people in big numbers.
Right.
And so
when you said us, I was thinking healthcare professionals, people of color, women of color.
Yeah. We don't do
it's all.
Yeah, it's all that. We don't do the policy piece. So Alma ended up running for state rep, and we ran into each other again because I was doing work at Washington County Public Health at that time in infant mortality.
Oh, okay.
And so we ran into each other again. I had her come and present at a health forum, and she called me and said, come work for me. And so at that time I said, okay, that's the policy piece, Mm-hmm. And so I became her district manager, and she actually let me do the work in public health. And she actually did the corrections budget and was on appropriations, but she let me do the public health piece and education piece. And during that process, Alex, I have to say, I learned the difference. I learned the difference of actually being that street advocate that was out there fighting for the constituents to that person that sat at the table and said, because you come from that. You come from knowing what people need because you've done the work, right? And you know the people, you're talking to them. Absolutely. And so you can present that, articulate that at the table. And that's when I said to myself, there's no greater work than being at the table. Mm-hmm. You have to be at the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's not just about sending your message. Mm-hmm. It's about you have to have a seat at the table. You have to not just be in the room. Mm-hmm. And that's influential in the sense that people look out, like you're saying, and see, but your voice has to be heard. And that's one of the reasons I'm running for mayor, is that I just feel that in the last couple of years that our voices as citizens have not been honored, and they have not been reflected in the decisions that have been made at the table.
I couldn't have said it better. And it's gratifying because, again, why I, so excited to have you on the show, and why, if I were living in the city, I live in the township, so I can't vote for you, but I'd be happy to. That. Is because of all those people that support you. And what I've seen and observing city council meetings and such is that kind of disconnect. It doesn't seem responsive.
I think we have good people.
To the community.
I think we have good people at the table. I think, though, that there's
Maurice Richardson, obviously, when I said the council.
But yeah, I mean, they're good people at the table. I just think that they have gotten caught up in, and this is just my personal opinion, that they've just been caught up in trying to make things happen. Right. And you just have to take a step back, because everything isn't rush, that you have to really stop and listen and hear what the citizens' concerns are and what they want to promote. One of the things, as mayor, I'm big on priorities, and that means that the citizen voice has to be first. That's the most important voice at the table. So every decision you make has to be centered around the fact, what are the citizens saying about this? And so, I mean, you don't have to rush overnight. Good policy isn't done in the twinkling hours. It's done through a well thought out process. And so that means that you get the issues before you, and you can't always operate in crisis mode, because again, that's not good policy. You have to be able to be nimble and be flexible and say, if we have something that pops up, that we can deal with it. But you also have an outline of what are our priorities. So the decision on that, or the answer on that, or the solution to that is driven by what your priorities are.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can see your passion and such, and that's what we need.
Work.
And that's what we need.
I love
but
it.
You have the experience of actually hands on the ground, actually doing the work, but then the policy.
Well, this has been my life's work. I mean, this isn't something I just decided to do one day. I have done this, for my life's work.
I mean, I'm happy whenever I see the passion and just somebody smart. But you have the experience actually too. Well, so it's even better.
My timeline was, I have to say, my timeline was a little off, because when I served on council, they even asked that question in the interview, why didn't you run in 2016? And in 2016, I had really determined, because people had talked to me about council, that I would say, well, I'll run probably in 2018, because then I knew that, one, I would be done with the state, House of State Representatives, because I worked for 2 state reps, and they're both 6-year terms. And so I said, you know what, by that time, and see, when you're working for a state rep, you can't run a campaign and run theirs too.
Well, and if everybody looks, you're clearly the most qualified. Really, when you look at them, I mean, seriously, when you take, being fair and looking at your opponents and looking at the records and stuff and their experience, I think, it's clear. It's subjective. I don't need to mention. It's serious.
I appreciate that.
And I want people to look for themselves. That's why I said that. I want them to look.
Well, I appreciate that, but I have to say this too. We all come to the table with lived experiences. Your educational background. I decided to pursue a degree in public administration because I liked the work, but I needed to know the technical piece. I needed just not the practical application. I wanted the actual knowledge, skill base to know that when I'm talking about things, that I have some foundation there. I'm not a person that just but I would like to know I have built up the foundation to do the work. And so I love it, just in the sense that, one, as I told you before, I like helping people. And in city government, it's about improving the lives of citizens, but it's also about making sure, it's twofold. It's making sure that the people who work for the city are as well taken care of, in the sense that you appreciate what they do, you acknowledge what they do, you value what they do, and in turn they value what they provide to the city. So there's no greater asset than a city employee, because they, to me, are the front line. They're the face of the city government. So when you have a garbage collector or a recycling center worker, a clerk, or someone who comes and greets the citizens and says, I'm so and so and I'm from the city of Ypsilanti, it's because the council and the city manager and the mayor have built up in them and said, we trust you, we value you, we honor you, so do your work.
I couldn't imagine coming to the meeting and seeing you during public comment and not responding at all. There's some disrespectful things in the decorum and such. But to me, I saw even some of the most respectful comments and really good points that just would be begged to be addressed. That Okay, it's over. And we just move on. And
there's
that,
a format for that. And and that's
that.
one of the things I think personally has to be addressed. Because you don't have to stick to that. You can actually, do in your charter ordinance that says, we'll set aside time to respond to the citizens' questions and concerns. But also, I think early on that because we have such an opportunity with new council members coming on to really change that dynamic.
Yes, yeah.
And say that we want to be responsive to citizens, that there needs to be time set aside that citizens can come and ask questions and that we respond. And it takes time, but you have to be willing to put in that time. And
if I could, I'd like to, before the show, I was talking about how I just thought that there wasn't there wasn't a culture of collaboration around here. And you were saying that you thought maybe a bigger problem is not just not enough diversity at the table when discussions and such are being made.
And when I say diversity, I'm not necessarily talking about race or ethnicity,
Right.
But when I'm talking about diversity of thinking, that we can't all be of the same mind, and that it's just about me or my ward or this. I mean, we have to be thinking the whole city, and how the decisions we make and how the actions we take, the solutions we come to impact every resident.
And that's why I think if people do not vote for you, it's a vote for a continuation
well, I mean, that's what
of the status quo. That's what I think.
But I'm leaving that to the voters to decide. I mean, I think we presented a great case. I mean, we came out talking about leadership because leadership is important. And I think some people think that leadership is just, getting in the corral and, woo, I'm bringing you home. I'm driving you to the answer. And that's not it. Leadership is really casting that vision, and it's building on that vision. And then it's nurturing that vision and promoting that vision to success. And one of the things I learned in nonprofit, which, I hope to use at the city, is the fact that, once the citizens have identified for us what the key priorities are, then those are on your agenda every meeting. And you sit there and look at that. When you're making decisions, you're saying, okay, the citizens said this was important, so how does this relate? So that every meeting you have to make an assessment, both personally and collectively, how are we doing? And one of the things we have to do every year is report to the citizens and say, in an annual report like most companies or organizations do, and say, have we met the mark? And everything we said that we were going to try to do on behalf of the citizens, how good did we do?
Right. And to your point, you said there's a process, and when I was talking about how they seemed unresponsive to public comment, but you just, I mean, you can put it on the agenda and discuss it.
Yeah, and sometimes they do later on in the meeting. I've seen that, and sometimes the current mayor has said, I want to address such and such, or I want to respond to this. And you can, it just has to be, I think, built in. And people don't want to be there all night, I'm sure. So you build in a,
that did get kind of ridiculous.
And again, as I said, those wee hours, you aren't setting good policy.
Right.
But you have to build in time to respond to the citizens. Otherwise, they walk away like, what's the use, or what's the point, or they feel, and that's when people start to walk away because they get disengaged. They just feel like, well, they didn't hear me, so.
We're going to go to 7:45, so we have about 15 minutes.
Okay.
So, what are the most important issues in the city of Ypsilanti right now?
You know what? I think that just from conversations at the door, people have talked to me about a number of things, infrastructure, but people have really talked to me about getting what happened to the train and why the train, the Wolverine stop has not happened. I mean, when I left council, we had already closed 2 streets, accepted payment for that, and had already had presentations on the
for some people in the audience that might not know the backstory, so what was the issue with the train and such?
Well, the train used to stop here years ago, and it doesn't. And so there was an opportunity for us to bring that rail, the Wolverine stop, back to Ypsilanti.
Okay.
And which was a passenger.
Right on Cross.
Yes, right there.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It was stop in Depot Town. And so, I mean, that was a big hope and aspiration for people. So we accepted payment from Amtrak to close, I believe it was Amtrak, you had to close 2 streets up there by Marsh Plating, which was the first couple steps in that process. And then from there, we'd already had presentations on 3 designs of platforms, which was the next step for the city in terms of responsibility. And that's kind of where it died off. I think the city got engaged in the ended up being the International Village concept design, and lost sight of what was really the easy picking fruit, and that was the low hanging fruit, I guess they say, which would have been the train stop. I mean, that you could have brought home for the citizens and said, what an accomplishment for the city. And we just have to get back to those kinds of things that really hone in on what the citizens want to see happen, because that to me is an economic driver. we're always talking about economic development. That rail stop is an economic driver because that one gives people mobility to and from work. A great partnership would happen with U of M, probably with Eastern, with Washington Community College, because one, they wouldn't have to deal with all the parking that, particularly U of M, that they could park, here, and hopefully we have a structure for them to park in.
Well, just look at 94 on a Friday.
Yeah, and I mean, that train will reduce traffic on Washtenaw. It'll reduce traffic on Packard, on Geddes Road, on Michigan Ave. So that's an asset. It would be an asset for the community as well as the region.
Okay. I couldn't stop you, though. So some of the other issues, the major issues, and I know, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would say, that people always talk about economic development. They talk about Water Street, and they talk about, for me, it would really be nurturing our businesses. I think that our business community, too, has been neglected. I think that nurturing our businesses to making sure that they understand we want them to do business in Ypsilanti, but we need to talk with them about what things they need from city government. To stay here and to be successful, to continue to thrive, because a lot of them are really doing well, but we need to have a greater partnership, a deeper partnership. So I think for me, it would be dealing with that Wolverine rail stop. It would be working with our businesses, both large and small, because we have a lot of startups that need nurturing as well. So I think that just talking with those businesses, like in a roundtable or something, and getting from them what has been missing for the last 10, 15 years that you really need from city government to deliver better, or to include, that would help you, stay here and do well.
And not just because I'm a proud West Willow resident, but and in Ypsilanti Township, but because we're so linked and we're all one community. But a lot of people don't know that 23,000 in the city, and I just heard a township official give a figure of 57,000 people in our township. The township encloses the city. I mean, we're just so enclosed. What do you see some opportunities for partnership in the township?
When business people have talked to me, they've asked me that question. I said, beyond meeting with the city staff, I believe my next meeting would be with both Brenda Stumble, who's supervisor in Ypsi Township, and a Ken Schwartz, supervisor in Superior Township, to really sit down with them and start building that relationship and building that trust. There are a lot of things that we can do together, but I think also that we need to further understand the needs and for lack of a better word, what our desires are, what their desires are, where we're lacking and where they're lacking, and where the commonalities are. I think that'd be my next conversation, because we have to have a better relationship with both townships. I mean, we're just living in that season in which we can't stay on an island. That in order to survive and to thrive, we have to have good working relationships with both our townships and with Ann Arbor. But I would say more so with those townships, and even Pittsfield Township, just because one, they have great economic development opportunities. We're right on Ecorse Road here together. I mean, right out Prospect together, LaForge, right? I mean, places like Hewitt, half city, half township. Mansfield, half city, half township. So we have to have better working relationships and understanding where we're going. I think a key for me in those relationships would be similar to what Ypsi Township is doing now, this kind of master planning, is that we need to be at the table.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, and I would think that for me, anytime we're sitting down doing master planning or budgeting and things, they need to be at the table. I mean, those things can be Googled anyway. There's no need in keeping secret. But I mean, stronger together, we do better. And, people have said to me, I was in Kalamazoo working with the deputy or director there, county director there. And she said to me, one of the reasons that Kalamazoo is really moving forward is that she said, we bring everybody to the table. We bring Kalamazoo County government. We bring Kalamazoo City. She said, we have a new business coming to town. The school board, everybody shows up at the airport to greet this new entity, because that shows them that we work collaboratively, that we want them here. And she said, we've just been successful in that model. And I think we should try to do the same.
I can imagine some township officials that are screaming. What are they
screaming?
The 2040 master plan. The 2040 master plan, it's still time for input and they're really encouraging. But you're talking about at the city, but they're just very open.
Yeah, and I think it should be
go
open.
to the White Town side, and Charlotte Wilson, she's head of the community development. But I mean, a lot of great things going on in the township.
But I mean, I think that anytime we're doing planning at that level, that all of your local elected, or either our economic development staff, someone needs to be involved to at least sit and listen and to share input. We've tried that, or we're thinking about trying that. How can we collaborate? Or, we did that, it didn't work so well. So I just think it needs to be seamless.
I love that. Nobody needs to tell you that either. That's coming from the heart. People need to be at the table.
Yeah, well,
you can see.
Yeah, I think, it needs to be seamless like that. I think, one of the things that we've talked about in past, conversations, not you and I, but with some of the township people, is that, we all, the sheriff did this, what is it called, that he deputized everybody. So there's no boundaries. And I think the same way in how we operate, that, people really don't know when they leave Ypsi and go to Ypsi
Absolutely
Township
not.
until, you're on Washington, you see the big sign, welcome to Ypsi Township. Right. But people don't think about that.
No, they don't.
I'm going down.
And I'm one of those that it's just, when it comes to voting in jurisdiction, I understand the importance, but it's Ypsi.
Well, and that's how I ended up, honestly, that's how I ended up not on the ballot, was because we turned in more than enough signatures, but there was some uncertainty when people said, I live in Ypsi. And my zip code's 48197, and you say to them, are you in the city or town? Oh, I'm in the city. And then they turned out, not to be in the city. And that's one of those cases like Mansfield, half city, half township, like Hewitt Road, half city, half township. So so people, just say, I live in Ypsi. And so they don't say, I live in Ypsi Township, I live in Ypsi. Yeah. That's all you hear. So, it's a great opportunity that we have right here in this community. And as mayor, I hope to bring all those talents to bear and skill that I have in education and knowledge of public administration to serve our people.
Housing, before we go, what are some of your feelings or thoughts on what I think the community benefits ordinance was
community benefits ordinance was
but that's
designed
only
around
so much,
and that's designed around any development, and I think there's some trigger points in there in terms of dollar amounts, but and somebody asked that question online, I think, and I submitted a kind of a lengthy answer. But for me, the first step in our housing assessment is to really determine the gap, and it would be also to assess what I consider to be housing stock, and that means the quality of the housing we have available. Because I know, as a homeowner, I've had to replace numerous things, roofing and all those things. And we really need to further understand the rental housing we have, the quality of that housing stock. And that's the first thing I would start with. But the other thing is we need to identify the gap in terms of what housing is available, how much housing we need. But I've said it, and I'll say it again, is that any development in terms of housing that becomes available needs to also include components of affordable housing. Yeah, we just have to. Yeah.
Absolutely. I wish I lived in the city because I always vote Democratic. I'm not a registered Democrat, but I'm not going to vote for that alternative.
You're not a card-carrying member.
No, I'm not a card-carrying member, and it is. I wish I could be more passionate sometimes when I vote. But if I were voted in the city, I'd be excited to write in and Brown because you'd be voting for something different, and not just being stuck with the choice. I think that's part of the excitement of it. I think that people recognize that I'm a great candidate in the sense that I bring the experience and education to the table. But the other thing is that the write-in thing, we try to make it fun and engaging. And because, once we knew, and people have said, well, you're a write-in. Yeah, and that's okay. We're not the first write-in. No. Ever. We have a sitting senator, Lisa Murkowski, out of Alaska.
Oh, thank you. Mayor Mike Duggan in Detroit, 50,000 votes right in. And his staff actually reached out to us, and we met with them, and they were like, there's nothing wrong with it. People will push back on it. Oh, you're right in. And his staff, his campaign staff said, if you embrace it, and go out there with confidence, and just tell people I'm a write-in and how to do a write-in. And it has worked. Just in the sense that we were honest from day one. The first email I think I sent out is we were short. And the clerk's office had given us some information, well, you go forward now as an independent or something. And we had to navigate all that water. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I said to the team that there's no need. We had several options. And I said, for me as a citizen, I would want to know, is she in or is she out? And so that's why I decided to chose to be a write-in, because I said, I don't want citizens wondering, because people were calling, well, Ann, are you going to run? Are you going to be able to run? And I said, you know what, we need to come together. I'm going to make a statement. We're going forward as a write-in.
You can tell the momentum's picking up, son. I hope people share this
Oh,
video
man,
and let people know about you.
I mean,
And
I'm
so,
just, grateful that, people know me because I've been here 40 years. And even people that have moved here recently, I've knocked doors, and I think that people get it. Just the fact that, when I talk about leadership and representation, we need to be at the table. Our voices need to matter. And we need to tell our city council that, the decisions you make on our behalf need to include us.
Absolutely.
And so that's, why I'm running. And I am excited about the campaign, have been from day one. And I have a great team. Bobby Anderson has served as our campaign manager. Yolanda Portis has been communications director. We recently brought on a field organizer, Brian, and a treasurer, Stacy DeAngelis. But I and have a great kitchen cabinet. But they, from day one, the night after, we didn't have the petitions, when Andrew called me and said, Ann, you're like 5 short, I reached out to the team, and I wrote them an email and said, such and such, and I didn't hear back from anybody. And then the next morning, my husband's like, well, what'd the team say? And I said, I don't know. I didn't hear from anybody. And so I'm at work the next day, and my phone is blowing off the hook. What do you mean? We're going forward. What are you talking about? And I said, yeah, we're going forward. I said, we just need to communicate that, and communicate that well. So that's like the first email we sent out. So
Brian really gets out there. I've met him. Brian
yeah. Well, the whole team is out there.
Yeah.
They're doing everything because, as I said, they're very engaged. I'm engaged, and the citizens have just been overwhelmingly warm toward us and accepting of this is a new thing.
Okay.
And embracing it, and we're going forward.
In our last minute, if besides going to your Facebook site and seeing Vote for Ann Brown, if people want to catch you between now and Election Day or this evening, where are you going to be at?
Well, tonight I'll be downtown. Be down probably in front of Ziggy's, talking to people and handing out lit. And we have a location at 222 Lincoln Street. That's 222 North Lincoln Street. So we'll be there this weekend and through Election Day. Still knocking doors and doing door hangers and making phone calls and trying to connect. Our whole goal has been focused on the voter, just engaging the voter. So I haven't paid attention to a lot what the other candidates are doing, because I'm just the kind of person that I just do my thing. I just want to be me, and I just encourage people to be themselves and go forward.
Well, I'm glad you is getting people involved, having some real change in the city government.
Yeah.
Please, if you want change, if you're tired of this radical acceptance of the status quo, and we start addressing the most vulnerable population.
Acceptance of the status quo.
Yeah, tired of it.
Yeah, well,
we need to address the most vulnerable people in this area.
Yeah, and we have to do a better job of just being inclusive. And I think that when decisions are made, that we have to see all the faces in the room, and that means that every ward, every person that is in this city needs to know that my city government stands up for me, that my city government represents me, and that my city government is taking action on my behalf. So when you talk about progressive, in me, I have to say, you have a person who's fought for health care. You have a person who stood up for funding in school care. But at the same time, I'm the person that will be at that table fighting for our citizens every stretch of the way. I just want to be the one that says, you know what, our citizens have said this, and we need to stand up for that at all costs.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Ann Brown, thank you. Writing candidate for Ypsilanti mayor.
Tell your friends and share. Bye-bye, everyone. Vote for Ann.
Well, thank you.